All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're tackling something I know a lot of us parents out there are constantly thinking about, managing screen time for kids.
Yeah.
It's a pretty big topic. I mean, we've got a ton of research articles
I
here.
got a lot of different opinions on this
Yeah,
one.
and personal anecdotes too, right? So many different perspectives and approaches. And honestly, some of my own struggles,
Sure.
I definitely, felt that tension between wanting my kids to benefit from technology, but also, not letting it take over their lives.
Right,
So
right.
our mission today is to go beyond those, basic screen time
Ah,
recommendations and really get into the nitty gritty, understand the impact, maybe uncover some strategies that actually work and yeah, just trying to make some sense of this whole digital parenting thing.
that sounds great.
All right, so let's start with a scenario we've all probably witnessed firsthand, right? You're at a restaurant or maybe even just at home, and there's a child completely absorbed in a tablet, oblivious to the world around them.
Yep, I've seen that.
It's a common sight, but beyond just the kid missing out on family time or a nice conversation, what does the research actually tell us about the effects of too much screen time?
Well, there's a growing body of research that highlights some potential downsides, particularly when it comes to things like vision and sleep.
Go.
For example, there was a study in the Journal of Pediatrics.
Okay.
It found that children who spend more than 2 hours a day on screens are like 60% more likely to develop myopia, which
Um,
is, nearsightedness.
wow, 60%, that's significant.
It is. And it's not just the amount of time, but also the type of screen.
Cool.
Like the blue light that's emitted from these devices, it can actually interfere with melatonin production,
Yeah.
making it harder for kids to fall asleep.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense because
Yeah.
I've definitely seen that with my kids, after they've had, a little bit too much screen time, especially before bed.
Right.
They just seem wired and they can't settle down.
Exactly. And sleep is, so important for a child's development. It affects everything from their cognitive function to like their emotional regulation and their physical health.
Absolutely. And that brings up another point I wanted to touch on, which is, um, that early childhood stage.
Yes.
Because I've heard from, some experts who believe that any screen time before the age of 2 is actually detrimental.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of evidence to support that view. Those early years are crucial for developing those, foundational skills like social skills, language development, emotional intelligence,
Right.
and face-to-face interaction. There's just no substitute for it.
Right.
And actually, there's this pledge gaining some traction called the Wait Until 8 pledge,
Wait until 8. Wow.
which encourages parents to delay any screen time until the child is 8 years old.
Oh, wow. That's a big commitment.
Yeah.
I'll be honest. I mean, I definitely struggle with that balance, especially when it comes to educational apps.
Hmm.
My son, he loves this coding game, and it is educational,
Right.
but if I let him, he would play it for hours on end.
Oh, I bet. It's a common dilemma. Right.
Right.
And I think that's where this concept of, digital nutrition comes in.
Okay. Digital nutrition. I like that.
It's kind of like, we make choices about the food our children eat, right? We want to make sure it's healthy and nutritious and in the right portions.
Yeah, that makes
So
sense.
it's kind of that same idea with their digital diet.
Okay, so how do we actually put this into practice?
Hmm.
Is it about setting really strict time limits, or is it more about choosing specific apps or content? How granular do we need to get?
Well, I think a good starting point is to create what's called a family media plan.
Okay.
And it's not about, having rigid rules.
Yeah.
It's more about having those open conversations as a family and setting some guidelines together collaboratively.
Right, because I know from experience that trying to dictate screen time, especially with older kids, can sometimes backfire.
Totally. Yeah.
It can turn into a power struggle.
Absolutely. So involving them in that process, helps them understand why these limits are in place.
Right.
You can talk about things like creating screen-free zones in the house, like the dinner table, for example.
Oh, the dinner table. That's a
Yeah.
that's a tough one for us.
Yeah, I hear you.
The kitchen is like the central hub of our house.
I think that's the case for a lot of families.
I'm always trying to balance, staying connected with friends online and also, being present with my family.
Yeah.
It's a challenge.
And you bring up a really important point, which is that we as parents need to model healthy screen habits ourselves.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Kids are incredibly perceptive.
Yeah.
They see us glued to our phones
Mm.
and they're learning from that.
It's a good reminder. Definitely a good reminder.
Yeah.
So Beyond the family plan and, setting a good example, are there any tech tools out there that can be helpful? I've heard about those parental control apps and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. There are actually some excellent options available.
Okay.
Some apps simply track screen time, which gives you data and insights into, your child's usage patterns.
Okay.
And others let you set daily limits. You can block specific apps or websites, even schedule screen-free time.
Wow, that sounds pretty advanced. But I got to admit, I've also heard stories about kids who figured out how to outsmart these apps.
Yeah, it happened.
A friend of mine, her daughter managed to bypass the time limits and ended up watching like 5 hours of YouTube.
Yeah. Yeah, it happens. I mean, technology is constantly evolving,
Right.
and kids are often, a step ahead.
They are.
But I think, the tech tools are just one piece of the puzzle, right?
Yeah.
The foundation is really about having that open communication, building a healthy relationship with technology as a family.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. So let's talk about alternatives.
Yes.
We've talked about limits and boundaries, but what are some things we can actually encourage our kids to do instead of, being glued to a screen?
Well, I think it's about encouraging activities that spark their imagination, their creativity. Things like, going outside and building a fort in the backyard or putting on a play,
Yeah.
getting lost in a good book.
You saying that about the fort, that reminds me of when I was a kid.
Uh-huh.
We used to spend hours in the woods
Yeah.
building these elaborate forts with branches and leaves.
It's amazing what kids can create with just their imaginations.
It really is, and I think, sometimes as parents we feel this pressure to constantly entertain our kids.
Right.
But giving them that space to just be bored even is so important.
It really is, yeah.
This has been so helpful. I really appreciate all of these insights.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts you want to leave our listeners with, as they navigate this whole screen time maze?
Yeah, I mean, just remember, it's not about eliminating screens entirely, right?
Right.
It's about finding that balance that works for your family.
Yeah.
And be kind to yourself. It's an ongoing process.
Yeah.
There's no perfect formula.
Well said. You've given us a lot to think about today.
It's been a pleasure.
And to all our listeners out there, remember, you're not alone in this.
Absolutely.
Keep those conversations going. Keep exploring different approaches. And I really believe you'll find that sweet spot, where screens actually enhance your family life
Yeah,
and they don't overshadow it.
absolutely.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
We'll see you next time on The Beep Dive.
Bye.
Bye.